There's a moment most people walk right past. It happens when someone receives a compliment and instead of smiling automatically, they go quiet. Not from discomfort, not from embarrassment, but because something in those words reached further than they expected. Men who have learned to observe rather than react tend to catch this moment. They've seen what words look like when they aren't performing. Here's something most people find difficult to admit out loud. Not every compliment feels the same when it lands. And the gap between one that resonates and one that falls flat has nothing to do with how polished the delivery was, how attractive the person is, or how perfectly timed the moment seemed. It has everything to do with origin, where inside a person those words are actually coming from. The majority of men operate under a quiet assumption that a compliment is supposed to produce something, build interest, spark attraction, trigger a specific response. That assumption is exactly what empties the words before they even arrive. The second language becomes a tool for getting, it stops feeling like truth. And women don't simply hear compliments with their ears. They read the current beneath them. They feel what's driving the words, and that undercurrent cannot be faked. This is why compliments from men who have lived longer often carry a different kind of weight. Not because they're more articulate, not because they're smoother or more confident on the surface, but because something in the way they speak has stopped reaching forward. Their words don't feel like beats, they feel like observations. They don't sound like flattery trying to get somewhere. They sound like someone who has simply noticed something real and said so. And that kind of recognition does something specific to the nervous system. It relaxes it. People who've stopped needing to explain themselves understand this without having to think about it. They've discovered that stillness carries more authority than any amount of visible effort. Before moving forward, something important needs to be said clearly. This has nothing to do with age as a number. It has everything to do with internal posture. Older men don't land differently with their words because they've lived longer on a calendar. They land differently because they've stopped negotiating. They're no longer using words to purchase reactions. Women register that absence immediately. Most men have been led to believe that attraction is generated through intensity, through emotional peaks, through saying exactly the right thing at exactly the right second. But attraction rarely takes root in that kind of noise. It takes root in safety. And safety isn't built by words that are reaching for something. It's built by words that come from a settled place. That's why the first compliment women deeply feel from this kind of man tends to be quiet in its construction. Something like, "I appreciate how comfortable you seem in yourself." That sentence doesn't elevate her. It doesn't put her on any kind of platform. What it does is far more subtle. It removes pressure. Most women move through daily life being evaluated in some form by culture, by people around them, often by themselves. When a man recognizes that she is simply at ease within herself, something in her releases because she understands she isn't being assessed. She's being witnessed. Men who've trained themselves to notice patterns rather than chase emotional spikes understand the mechanics at work here. That compliment isn't asking her to become more. It's communicating that she is already enough right now in this moment. And acceptance moves faster toward trust than almost anything else. But here's the piece most people overlook. That trust isn't about emotional need. It's about emotional permission. Permission to stop managing how she appears. Which brings everything toward the second compliment that women feel genuinely moved by when it comes from a man like this. Something along the lines of, "You have a calm presence. That's rare." Calm has become almost suspicious in a world that rewards urgency and stimulation. It feels unfamiliar, and yet calm is one of the things people hunger for most. When a man acknowledges a woman's calm, he isn't feeding from her energy. He isn't asking her to match his pace or escalate the interaction. He's responding to what she actually is. And without stating it directly, he's communicating something important. You don't need to entertain me. You don't need to manage this moment. You don't need to keep the energy climbing. Men who stay grounded have stopped chasing intensity because they understand what it produces. Fast connection and equally fast collapse. Calm builds something that moves more slowly and holds far longer. At this point, something starts shifting quietly in how she perceives the interaction. She's no longer calculating what she needs to offer. She's becoming aware of how she actually feels. That's a significant pivot. Because attraction doesn't grow where effort is required. It grows where effort disappears, which is exactly where the third compliment leaves. I enjoy the way your mind works. This one doesn't land because it's intellectual. It lands because it signals presence without agenda. It tells her that the person across from her isn't waiting for an opening, isn't scanning the conversation for opportunity, isn't trying to extract something useful from the exchange. They're simply there, engaged, genuinely curious. Men who are no longer auditioning deliver this naturally because they're not trying to impress. They're interested. And being seen intellectually reaches somewhere deeper than being admired physically ever could, because it touches identity rather than surface. People who have spent years feeling misread understand this the moment it happens. They feel immediately the difference between someone who admires them and someone who understands them. Once that difference is felt even once, it becomes impossible to unfeel. Here's where a tension worth examining appears. None of these compliments have touched appearance. That isn't a coincidence. It's a signal. The ones that move women don't evaluate, they recognize, and recognition doesn't rush. It watches, waits, and then speaks from what it has actually seen. Some men encounter these ideas and immediately think about memorizing them as lines. That's the single fastest way to hollow them out completely, because a woman isn't responding to the sentence itself. She's responding to the interior state of the man delivering it. Once that distinction is truly understood, the goal shifts. You stop trying to say the right thing. You start actually noticing things. And that changes everything about how your words land. The real power in compliments like these isn't in what is being said. It lives in what is not happening internally at the same moment. The most effective compliments don't create movement. They create stillness. And stillness unsettles people who rely on reaction to feel like they matter. That's the context for the fourth compliment women deeply appreciate. Something like, "You don't try too hard," and that's genuinely attractive. This one settles in quietly. Many women carry an unspoken, persistent pressure to justify their presence, to be interesting, engaging, charming enough to warrant being in the room. When a man specifically notices effortlessness, he's doing something that almost no one does. He's taking down the scoreboard, communicating without saying so directly that there's nothing being measured here, nothing she needs to earn. Men who have stopped chasing validation understand why this matters so completely. Attraction doesn't grow under the weight of observation. It grows in the absence of it. Effortlessness signals that she's safe here. Something else shifts at this stage. She stops tracking how she's coming across. She becomes present. And presence is where actual connection becomes possible. Notice what still hasn't happened throughout all of this. There has been no inflation, no praise designed to elevate. No pedestal being constructed. That restraint is doing more work than any amount of enthusiasm could accomplish. Which leads to a fifth compliment carrying genuine psychological weight. You have depth. Not everyone does. Depth isn't a casual surface remark. It's a recognition that takes time to arrive at. When a man who has lived through enough complexity says something like this, it doesn't feel offhand because he has learned to distinguish between substance and noise, between real emotional weight and performed intensity. This compliment makes a woman feel chosen in a specific and meaningful way, not idealized for what she appears to be, chosen for what exists beneath that. And that distinction lands harder than most people realize. Men who've accumulated enough experience understand the difference between the two outcomes. Being placed on a pedestal creates pressure to maintain the illusion. Being genuinely understood creates loyalty. Depth points to inner substance, emotional layers, real experience. It communicates that the man across from her isn't chasing novelty. He's recognizing something of actual value. Here is where the perspective begins to shift for a lot of people sitting with these ideas. Up to this point, everything covered might seem simply respectful, thoughtful, even kind. But that isn't the root of why it works. It works because none of it asks for anything back, no reaction expected, no validation required, no specific outcome being pursued. That complete absence of demand is what creates the conditions for attraction. The sixth compliment that women love hearing from men like this reflects that quality directly. Something like, "I respect the way you carry yourself." Respect operates differently than praise. Praise lifts someone up, often onto unstable ground. Respect places them on solid footing as an equal. When a man communicates respect, he's signaling maturity without claiming dominance, interest without intrusion. Men who've stopped needing to explain their every move understand this instinctively. Respect says, "I see your autonomy. I'm not trying to steer you. I'm not trying to win you over. I'm simply noticing you." That creates emotional safety at a depth that most people can't quite put into words, but feel immediately in their body. And here's the part that tends to surprise people. Respect builds attraction slowly, and then all at once, because it doesn't stimulate, it stabilizes. The pattern forming through all of this deserves attention. Every single compliment removes pressure. None of them add something extra to her. They remove friction. That's the mechanism underneath everything, which moves us toward the seventh compliment, one that often goes unnoticed until it hits. You don't feel the need to prove anything. That comes through as real confidence. This lands like a breath of relief for many women. The pressure to justify choices, to explain boundaries, to defend pace, to earn the right to take up space is something many women carry constantly. When a man names quiet confidence directly, he's communicating something important. "I'm not evaluating your worth. I trust your own sense of yourself." And confidence that requires no outside confirmation is genuinely rare. Rare things carry value without ever announcing it. Men who stay composed under pressure recognize this quality immediately because they've learned that the loudest version of confidence is usually the most compensatory. The quiet kind needs no audience. Something settles at this point in the interaction. She stops wondering where she stands. She feels steady. And steadiness becomes addictive in a world that is structurally built on instability. The eighth compliment is often the one that matters most, even though it sounds the simplest on the surface. "I enjoy being around you. It feels genuinely easy." This doesn't read as romantic at first glance. That's precisely what makes it effective. Ease means no performance required. No tension to manage, no emotional labor being silently demanded. It tells her that she doesn't exhaust whoever is beside her. She doesn't complicate things. She adds comfort to the space. And comfort is the thing that makes people actually stay. Here's the psychological truth most men never sit with. People don't bond over excitement. They bond over relief. Relief from effort, relief from having to explain themselves, relief from the pressure of being constantly evaluated. Men who've moved beyond chasing chemistry succeed here because they're no longer looking for a spark. They're noticing compatibility. And compatibility doesn't spike, it settles. There's still one mistake that quietly destroys most compliments before they ever truly land. It's the thing worth confronting directly because once you see it clearly, you stop using words to get something and start using them to reveal something. That's where the real shift lives. The mistake is that compliments ask for something. Approval, attention, interest, a confirming reaction. The instant a compliment reaches forward in that way, it collapses under its own weight. Men who've spent enough time in silence begin to recognize this pattern with clarity. Words don't fail because they were chosen poorly. They fail because they were motivated by need. Women are extraordinarily sensitive to this, not as a conscious calculation, neurologically. They don't just hear what was said. They pick up where it came from. A compliment delivered from need feels hollow and thin. A compliment delivered from calm feels solid and grounded. And grounded words carry mass. This is where men who have genuinely grown past the need to impress separate themselves without any visible effort. They're not positioning. They're not bargaining. They're not fishing for anything. They're simply observing. And observation is scarce in a culture wired for reaction. People who have stopped requiring a specific outcome from every interaction understand this intuitively. They've learned that the strongest place to stand is the one that requires no defending. When a compliment comes from need, it creates a subtle but palpable tension. Even if the words are perfectly chosen, even if the tone is smooth and calm on the surface, the nervous system detects the expectation underneath it. Something is being asked for. And expectation creates pressure. When a compliment arrives from a place of calm awareness, the opposite unfolds. The pressure lifts. There is no urgency pulling at the moment, no emotional grab. Just someone who noticed something real and said it simply. And that simplicity feels grounding because it asks for no movement in return. This is why men operating from this place don't rush their compliments. They don't stack them on top of each other. They don't escalate. They let the words breathe because they're not trying to build toward anything. They're letting meaning settle at its own pace. The realization many men resist when they first encounter this is that the most attractive compliments are not designed to attract. They reveal presence. And presence is what most people are quietly starving for without being able to name it. Something else worth pausing on. Not one of these compliments changes her emotional state. They meet her where she already is. That is not accidental. Attempting to shift someone's emotional state creates resistance. Recognizing someone's emotional state creates connection. This is why none of these compliments spike excitement. They produce clarity. And clarity feels powerful because it dissolves confusion. Many people sitting with these ideas reach a moment where they begin reconsidering their own patterns. They realize they weren't approaching things from a place of bad intention. They were simply working with an incomplete picture. They believed attraction was something to be manufactured. In reality, it's something that's allowed when the pressure comes off, allowed when the intention behind the words is clean, allowed when language stops being transactional. Men who've reached a certain internal maturity don't attract by impressing. They attract by perceiving. And perception feels intimate because it requires genuine attention that isn't angled toward any outcome. A question worth sitting with quietly, not rushing to answer. When you offer someone a compliment, is it an observation or is it an attempt? Just that distinction changes everything about how the words land and what they do once they arrive. People who have stopped chasing reactions understand this truth without needing to think about it. The less you require a moment to unfold in a particular way, the more powerful your presence becomes within it. This is why women often describe compliments like these as feeling different without being able to say exactly why. It isn't that the words were clever, it's that they felt clean. No residue, no unspoken expectation attached, no invisible string pulling at the exchange. And that cleanliness produces trust. Trust produces ease. Ease produces attraction, not the volatile kind that burns out fast, the durable kind that builds over time. The final shift is subtle, but once it's seen, it doesn't reverse. Men operating from this place don't give compliments as a way of moving closer. They give them because they are already centered, and centered people don't reach. They notice. There's an internal upgrade that happens once this becomes real, not visible on the outside at first. Something changes inside, and it reshapes how a person moves through every interaction without them consciously trying to move differently. Most men assume that maturity shows up as new behavior. What it actually shows up as is the disappearance of old behavior. You stop trying to steer moments toward the preferred outcome. You stop engineering how you'll be remembered. You stop trying to land somewhere specific with your words, and the moment that effort dissolves, something else becomes visible in its place. Your actual presence, Men who've learned to stay quiet long enough know this stage well. It's the realization that you no longer need to announce yourself to be felt in a room. That's the hidden truth underneath every compliment we've covered. These are not strategies, they are symptoms. Signs of a man who has stopped negotiating his worth through every interaction he has. Men who have genuinely arrived here didn't decide one morning to speak differently. They simply woke up and found they no longer needed to position themselves. So their words stopped reaching. They began to settle. And women feel something different when words settle rather than reach. Not excitement exactly. And recognition produces a quiet psychological effect that most people don't anticipate. It makes someone feel real. In a world where nearly everyone is performing in some way, being genuinely seen feels rare. That's the layer underneath everything we've explored. I appreciate how at ease you are in yourself. I enjoy the way your mind moves. I respect the way you carry yourself. It feels easy being here with you. None of these try to define who she is. They confirm who she already is. And confirmation quiets the nervous system because it removes the uncertainty that lives underneath everything else. Uncertainty is exhausting to carry. Clarity, real clarity, is attractive. The shift worth recognizing right now isn't about needing better lines or sharper delivery or more surface confidence. It's about having less internal noise. Compliments don't fail from a lack of charm. They fail from a lack of grounding. The moment you stop using words to produce outcomes, your words begin producing trust instead. And trust doesn't announce its arrival. It simply settles in, quietly, completely. This is why women often struggle to explain why compliments like these feel different. They only know that they do, because the man behind them isn't trying to enter her world. He's stable inside his own. And stability is magnetic in a culture that has forgotten what stable feels like. Men who no longer need reactions speak differently. Men who no longer need to explain themselves are heard differently. Men who observe before they open their mouths are felt differently. Once this becomes genuinely clear, something permanent but quiet shifts in the way a person moves. You stop complimenting in order to connect. You connect. And compliments emerge naturally from that. You stop trying to be impressive, and your calm begins to be the thing people notice. You stop chasing chemistry, and ease starts doing the real work. This isn't about age. It's about how a person spends their energy. When you stop spending it to get something back, it becomes visible, tangible, felt. That is why the men we've been talking about attract not through impression, but through perception. And once you perceive without needing anything from what you perceive, your words stop trying to move the moment. They anchor it. From that place, you no longer speak to be remembered. You speak from somewhere that doesn't need memory to feel whole. And people feel that immediately, quietly, without any confusion at all. If this perspective shifted something for you, pass it along to someone who needs to hear it.